Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming. My talk today is based on a simple question that we asked ourselves, which is to host or not to host. And before I get into telling you the story of why we decided to go to OnDemand and how, I'd like to just see a quick show of hands. How many of you use installed download versions of JIRA Confluence? How many of you are using OnDemand? And how many of you are considering moving to OnDemand? Okay, makes sense. Well, hopefully in the next 10 minutes I'll be able to share some tips to help that decision go more smoothly. So in the next 10 minutes, what I'm going to cover is a little bit about us, why we chose OnDemand, the migration process in general, and then some specifics for each of the products. So Healthonomy was founded a couple of years ago. We are an electronic medical records software for physicians that treat injured workers or workers' comp physicians. From a technical perspective, we are a LAMP stack that we run on Amazon Web Services, and we have 6 full-time and 5 part-time employees. So for the first 2 years, we used JIRA, Greenhopper, and Confluence, the download versions, and we also had our own subversion repository. And these are running on AWS instances that also were running other services. So we had multiple versions of our application, a MySQL slave, and so forth. This worked great while the team was up to a size of 10, because you know Atlassian has a wonderful pricing model to encourage small teams to get started. But then the 11th person came along. So we had to make a decision. Do we pay for licenses and continue with our current infrastructure, or do we switch to OnDemand, which wasn't available to us when we started a couple of years ago? Now, I showed JIRA, Greenhopper, and Confluence here, but I also show FishEye. For you, those of you that aren't familiar with FishEye, it is for us, it is a subversion repository that is hosted by Atlassian as well, and I include that because we also migrated to FishEye. So let's just take a quick look at the advantages of each. The advantages of the installed version. So the first thing is you retain control of your data. So last night at the party I was talking to someone that had a client that does a lot of military, classified military work. So OnDemand was simply not an option for them. The second key thing is that you can install any plugin that you want. And with Atlassian's rich plugin ecosystem, there's a lot of benefits to be able to use any plugin that you want. And I understand this is a highly requested feature, so hopefully this will change in the coming year. But right now, that's the case. And then lastly, you have greater flexibility with customization. And specifically what I'm referring to here is FishEye doesn't support subversion hooks. So there's a workaround that I'll talk about that you have to do if you move to FishEye. Okay, advantages of OnDemand. So the first thing is you get automatic upgrades, and this is great because Atlassian's always pushing out new features. And a side effect of this is that you don't have to pay someone to do the upgrades. You don't have to find the time when you can, you've scheduled downtime for doing the upgrade and backups and so forth. So the lower maintenance cost. The other thing we really liked was integration with other Atlassian products. So for example, one of the reasons we moved to FishEye was that we could take advantage of Crucible, the code review tool. Google Apps integration is also a plus. So now you just manage all your users on your Google Apps side, and you can synchronize that with JIRA and Confluence, and then all you have to do is just click checkboxes to enable application access. So you get single sign-on, you get attachment of Google Docs within your Google Apps domain. We also noticed an improvement in performance, especially with JIRA, which is very data heavy. And of course, we could have paid for larger AWS instances, but all things considered, we really appreciated the performance improvement. And then lastly, availability. So we're a really small company. All of our customers are in California. All of our production internet servers are all on the same AWS region and availability zone. So if our production site is down and it's an AWS connectivity issue, that means we probably can't get to JIRA and Confluence either, which means we can't access our emergency response plan documents. Now that's not an issue, and we've had no issues with availability since the switch. Oh, am I? Okay. All right, let's take a look at cost. So what I'm showing here is the cost, what it would have cost us for year one, and what it would have cost us for each additional year after that. And this is for JIRA, Confluence, FishEye, Crucible, Greenhopper, and Bonfire. And then the other thing you'll notice here is, so if with the installed versions, you have the license cost, but then you have about 50% more when you take into account running your own instance and paying somebody to manage that instance and doing the upgrades and so forth. With OnDemand, there's also AWS and contractor expenses, and the reason for this is the subversion mirror workaround that I'll get to in a second. So all in all, it's very compelling to move to OnDemand. This is a very compelling reason for us to switch. I think the only reason I can think of going with installed from a cost perspective is if you don't want to upgrade after the first year. And just one other note, these prices are for 11 or more users for all products except FishEye and Crucible. So we don't have more than 10 developers, so the price is a little bit lower. All right, so the migration process, it's actually relatively straightforward. You dump the file from your existing download version, and then you import it into OnDemand. Now, we actually ran through this process twice. The first time, we encouraged our users to go to OnDemand and try it out and let us know if they had any problems. And then we learned from that, and then repeated it for our final migration. We started with Confluence, and this turned out to be the easiest to migrate. Only a couple of points here. First of all, you have to migrate every space individually. So, and remember, there are global spaces and there are personal spaces. The second thing is, after you've migrated, make sure that all of your user groups have also been moved over. So we had a case where a page wasn't accessible, and all we had to do was add a user group that didn't get migrated over. JIRA was also quite straightforward. A couple of points here. So Webdav is used to upload the dump file, and we weren't able to upload it. And it turned out all we had to do was turn on FishEye application access. This is kind of not intuitive because it's a separate product. The other thing is we used a tool called Cadaver, which is a Webdav client for Unix. So we were able to upload directly from our AWS instance. Migrating Subversion to FishEye was the most complex, probably because we're not migrating from an Atlassian to an Atlassian product. And the first thing to note here is, so early on in our company, someone had checked in some credentials, passwords, so forth, into our Subversion repository. And even though those have been removed, it's still in the history, and you're importing all the history into FishEye. So the first thing we had to do is make sure that all of our passwords and keys and credentials had been rotated so that those were invalidated. The second thing is we were unable to create branches and delete branches until we granted access to the repository root. By the way, at the end of the talk, I have a URL that outlines all these tips and has some links to instructions for how to do these. And the next two, I actually have visuals to talk about, so I'll just jump into that. So the first thing is your Subversion repository has to have a certain structure. So what you need to do is browse your projects in JIRA Confluence, and you have to have a top-level directory that matches every key for every project, and it's case sensitive. Okay? And you have to have branches, tags, and trunk subdirectories for each of those. Otherwise, the import will fail. So one issue that we had was that in our Subversion repository, we had lowercase Healthonomy, and we had to convert that to uppercase. So in addition to creating this this other IN branch, which was empty, but we needed it for the import to succeed, we also had to rename the project, and we used a tool called svn dump reloc to do that. Okay, So one of the things, when we commit to trunk, we automatically update our QA servers so that our QA team can test every feature immediately. And we did this using subversion post-commit hooks. So when you commit, post-commit hook fires, which then runs an SVN update on the server. And instead, what we had to do was, FishEye doesn't support this, so we had to set up a subversion mirror. And so the mirror, we have a cron job that runs SVN sync, and then that fires the post-commit. That's it. Thank you very much. I also want to thank the contractors that did all the heavy lifting, Alan Carhart and John Michael Ong. And there's a link here to a blog with links to helpful resources. Thank you.